Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab, brought to you by CPA Practice Advisor, with your hosts, Randy Johnston and Brian Tankersley.
Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab. I'm Randy Johnston with my co-host, Brian Tankersley. We are pleased to have you along today as we discuss Claude Anthropic's Mythos. Now, this new AI platform was held back by the Anthropic company, and I believe, in fact, it was properly done so. Now, as it turns out, initially they said that they'd release this to 40 companies. The quantity at the time of our recording is 57, and the reports are really stunning in terms of the capabilities of the platforms. So, Brian, I know you've done a bit of research on this. I've looked at it too. What would you like our listeners to know about Mythos and what Anthropic's doing here?
Well, with the information revolution, when we had bulletin boards, we had people that had things like the Anarchist Cookbook that showed people how to make pipe bombs. We had script kiddies, we had all kinds of things like that, and everybody was worried about how that was going to affect our discourse, and we made it. We have now AI that has the capability of finding all kinds of security vulnerabilities, some known, some unknown, and looking for new ones at a marginal cost that's fairly low. You know, the thing about AI and its impact on the way you do things is, you know, if I have a question that's in the back of my mind, I simply will go get an agent and kick it off and have it solve the problem, solve the question that I was asking at a marginal cost that's much lower than me having to do it myself. And so this thing that we have to get used to here is that it's going to cost the bad guys much less to develop new exploits and to write code for new exploits and to penetrate new systems. So anyway, there's actually stories in a couple of national security blogs because I think this does have national security implications. There was a big article in the New York Times in, I guess, the second week of April, and then right after April 15th, there was a national security blog that referred to it as Anthropic's nuclear bomb, which I don't think really is, you know, I don't think that hyperbole is that far out, really. So here's what's happened. In April, Anthropic launched this Claude Mythos preview. Frontier model, especially good at computer security tasks. You know, when Randy and I are out meeting with vendors and talking to software companies, all the software companies are saying that Claude code is really a revolution in the way you develop software. And so, you know, obviously Anthropic was trying to create a model that was more efficient at generating code and something that they could scale to support the booming number of people that are trying to use Claude. Anthropic said the model was strikingly capable at computer security tasks, described it as a watershed moment for security. Okay. The public write-up that Anthropic put out said that the same capabilities that help patch bugs can also find, weaponize, and chain vulnerabilities faster. You'll recall in the past we've talked about AI-generated malware, and you know a lot of the models have speed bumps in them and limitations to try to stop people from creating malware with applications. Unfortunately, when you get into computer security and looking for vulnerabilities, one man's pen test is another man's hacking. So again, this is why, so what Anthropic did responsibly is they pulled the model and said they're not going to release it immediately, but they set up a project called Project Glasswing, and they gave the model to a number of big hardware software companies. So again, here's New York Times. They said that again, we're maybe entering a period where lead exploit development becomes far more accessible. Just like again, the scripts with the script kiddies back in the 90s, the people wrote scripts. And so good, you know, strong people with strong computer skills wrote scripts. And then people that didn't have great skills could run those scripts and get things done. Kind of like people do today when they're doing pen testing with some Linux distributions like Kali. It has built in some tools to make things a lot easier. So again,
And to your point on all this, just to help our listeners get a sense of how strong this is, the prior Claude model, Claude Opus 4.6, had about a 0.8% chance of discovering a vulnerability and putting the parts together, chaining it, if you would, to actually create an attack product. Now, we knew and have reported to in prior labs that the ability to create these tools has dropped to less than 2 hours. So when a vulnerability is discovered, the hackers can actually attack you within a couple of hours, which is why we've converted our recommendation to patch immediately, even though it's going to break some things upon occasion. This new Mythos product is reported to have a 72.4% success rate. In other words, it finds and takes advantage of these vulnerabilities at a very high rate compared to any prior model. Also,
So 1,000 times, so 100 times more likely to discover that than the previous one. So two orders of magnitude.
yeah, and so this gets even more interesting because since all this came out about Claude Mythos, of course, Google has released their next strategy, and all their new TPU version 8s. And of course, you've got Mark Zuckerberg back in the lab coding with his friends on the Meta models. And OpenAI has released their product of this class. So all of a sudden, you've got at least the three major competitors all building more capable models with similar capabilities. Not as strong as Mythos from what the reports are, but still strong. And of course, you've got Musk and Sam Altman fighting in court as we're recording this. So, the
Yeah,
defend.
and that's going to be a very interesting court case, I think.
I hope we'll report in a future lab. And again, we're not here to bring you the news, but I'm just watching all of this maneuvering because we could talk about Grok and what some of its capabilities are too, or DeepSeek. But we want to stay with this Mythos reckoning because, in fact, the nuclear bomb piece is not a far-fetched item. The other thing that I've been reading in the meantime, Brian, is about bioterrorism, and that the model where they've released this to the 57 companies, they've been able to create bioattack tools. And so, I'm not trying to go back to COVID, but there's a lot of people that thought that was a attack tool. I don't know, but I do know that you can bioweapon create things with the current AI products, and Mythos made it even greater.
Yeah, it really is a force multiplier for whoever's using this. And so it really means that we're going to have to really, get our head down, elbows out, and start really working more and more on security. And we're going to have to be much more timely on the patching that we're doing. Again, the Mythos reportedly found zero-day exploits in every major browser and operating system, even a 27-year-old vulnerability in OpenBSD. Just a reminder that BSD is considered to be one of the most secure variants of Linux. And so to find a 27-year-old vulnerability means that this is really looking hard, and things are going to come from places we didn't expect.
And one of the
Uh,
reports on that, Brian, and you're the one I think that told me about this, like 5 million attempts have been made to find bugs in BSD. And this one had escaped detection until Mythos came along.
I have a childhood friend that does pen testing for really large enterprises. And a few years ago, I was talking to him and I said, what, if I'm trying to run something that is hyper secure, well, what should you run? He said, oh, OpenBSD. It's the most secure product out there. It's got the most people looking at it. I'd run BSD. So this is Berkeley Systems distribution of Linux. So I'm just telling you this because to find something in that really says something. The Anthropic also said they found a 16-year-old video FFmpeg video player bug that Mythos identified. And Hacker News summarized it as thousands of high severity 0 days across major systems. Now, we used to freak out when we had a single 0 day in a month disclosed in the security community. The concept of dumping 1,000 high severity 0 days onto the market all at once and forcing all that software is really the cyber equivalent of nuclear war, because your systems are not going to be able to be reliable underneath that.
And to that 0 day point, Brian, the Microsoft Patch Tuesday in February was like record quantities of these 0 days dumped. If I recall the number, it was 6 0 days with 58 vulnerabilities. And that was like considered super extraordinary. And when you just look at what happened with Patch Tuesday in the first 4 months of the year, January, February, March, April, the 0 days are increasing in almost all those months. And don't quote me on this, but I think January had 3 0 days, and I think March had two, and I think April had two. So that kind of gives you the run rate. And
Yeah. And 10 years ago, when you had 1 0 day, it was a red letter day that everybody paid attention to.
yeah, exactly. And so notice Brian is saying, 1,000. Okay, whoa, wait a minute. And the Citibank reports on this were pretty stunning because they thought almost all of their bank systems would be compromised if Anthropic's Mythos went to market. So just we've talked about that in the past too. We're not conspiracy theorists. We're just, accounting technicians that watch stuff. And it's been clear to us that the banking systems could be compromised, and just consider what would happen if all banks and ATMs and credit cards couldn't function. So just ask yourself today, how long could you function without any cash, without any credit, without any debit cards?
So it's funny you say that. I'll share a personal story. It was 1989, and they had the World Series earthquake in San Francisco. That, when the A's and the Giants were playing in the World Series game, I was
And I
actually
was and
on.
I was there. I was in the
I,
place.
Okay, and I'm on the way to an evening lab for an accounting class at UC Davis where we were doing practice sets. Okay, so this is that far back, and I get there and I see the building shaking and everything, and then I didn't think anything of it, but it was the time of the month when my parents, that lived 100 miles away, put money in my bank account so that I could do what I needed to in there. So I was pretty much out of food, out of money, out of everything. It was time to go. And when the earthquake hit, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, all the big banks basically shut down, and you couldn't use your ATM card or write checks for about 3 days. Well, folks, I had water chestnuts for lunch one day because that's what I had in the cabinet. Okay. And I'm just telling you this because this is something that we never thought could happen, but it's something where it got very strange in Davis, California there, because there were a lot of people that, had plenty of money in the bank account and just couldn't access it. And my situation was I didn't have any money in the bank account and I couldn't access that money in the bank account and I couldn't get anybody to put any in there. So it created kind of like this Iran thing has created a gas price and diesel price crisis because of the change in the systems. It's kind of the same thing where again we may have some situations where the banking system has a few hiccups as a result of this.
So in all the times I've known you, Brian, I haven't ever heard the water chestnut story. So I think I'll put that on the menu with you for Kentucky Fried Chicken. I think there's another story, friends, on that, which we won't tell on this episode. But
And I definitely won't eat.
it's kind of like my partner that founded NMGI with me, who got stranded in a snowstorm and would never have cream soda and Oreos again. So I do
Yeah.
understand upon occasion how that happens. But back on topic here, this can be catastrophic. So I am completely respectful of Dario Amodi, and actually his wife is the president of Anthropic, which is a little odd, but that's the structure. They started the business with a
Any man that believes they can tell their wife to do anything is wrong.
but
That's
she's also, helping run this company, I think, in a good way with the constitution that they have. And generally, Claude is doing a lot of the AI controls correctly in my mind. And there's a lot of these other AI providers that not so much. But that's maybe a story for a different day too. So
so
this breakthrough is really interesting. And talk about the benchmark signals if you can, Brian.
Yeah, so this is kind of by the numbers here. Anthropic went through and had 10 full control flow hijacks that were done against fully patched OSS fuzz targets in its internal benchmark. And so what this means is that we had machines that were fully patched, we thought were completely good to go, and it found 10 different hijacks where it could go in and do things. Generate 881 working JavaScript shell exploits that for patched Firefox vulnerabilities versus 2 in Opus. Um, Human reviewer, and Claude's sense of what is a good exploit is that its judgment is actually pretty good. Um, when they were looking at vulnerabilities, human reviewers matched Claude 90% of the time on 198 reports, and they were within one level 98% of the time. So it has a good feel for what can work and what's not. Again, we've got lots of things by the numbers up here, but what this means is going to happen is the discovery time is going to compress. And again, this is going to be this vulnerability discovery, proof of concept generation, and exploit refinement can all be done almost outsourced to Claude. Again, just like we've seen with tax research, the real advantage of AI tax research is that you can consider so many more different scenarios and so many more different fact patterns that you can put against things so you can get a better decision and assess the risks much better. Same kind of thing here. They can, instead of testing one exploit in a few hours, they can test dozens or hundreds of exploits. And so the likelihood of success is much higher, and the likelihood of surprises is much less if you're the attacker and much more if you're the person being attacked. But what it means also is that, just like Randy said earlier, where the default is going to have to be where you patch immediately. I don't know that I'm not going to, I don't know that I'm not going to try to find a way to patch every hour instead of once a day, kind of like we did with antivirus. We used to get antivirus updates once a week, then we went to once a day, then we went to once an hour. And I don't know that I'm not going to try to check for those kinds of things. But again, this War on the Rocks, this national security blog that is very influential in policy circles, said that it was, again, a strategic inflection point because it means that we don't know how quickly these frontier model cyber capabilities diffuse into state criminal and commercial ecosystems. So at what point do the North Koreans and the Iranians and or Al Qaeda or any other bad actor that wants to disrupt our civil society, at what point do they go in and deploy these things? Now, again, I'm not trying to scare you to death, but I want you to know that your defensive posture for your security needs to change. Okay. The arguments you're having about two-factor authentication with people about whether or not it's necessary, that party's over. Okay.
Mhm. And
You
rather
should
than
be.
just governmental espionage, think about corporate espionage. A
Yeah.
competitor using this against you, or a client being attacked by a competitor. What do you do there? So, I mean, this is very far reaching. Sorry to step on your comment there, Brian.
No, no, I completely agree. This is from a RAND Corporation publication on charting a course towards cybersecurity. And one of the things about this is that this whole timing of a security vulnerability, what really is happening in this case, and let me get this opened up here. What's really happening is instead of it taking, days to do this, it's now becoming hours. Okay. And so that's the thing that's really happening with this. The timing of this is happening much faster. You're going to have to react much faster, again, to do things. The other thing that's happening is for things to work, for a hack to really work out, we've got three different things that have kind of got to be daisy chained together. Okay. We have to go out and find the vulnerabilities. Okay. The weaknesses in the systems that can be exploited. Then we have to find the ways to exploit it. Okay. So it's not just knowing that there's a weakness, it's finding the weakness and using it to your benefit. And then we have to move laterally and take over additional parts of it. So again, we have to extend further. And so the thing that AI is doing is it is breaking down these two walls in between these three and making it possible now to try attempts at scale with a much lower marginal cost, which means that we're going to have to be much more careful, and things like pen test may become much more important in the near future.
So many of you have advisory services for cybersecurity. In fact, I talked to a firm that is just launching into that area. And I want you to consider the risk to the firm by providing that particular service because your cybersecurity team is going to have to be really on top of it in the very near term. I mean, they've always had to be on top of it, but as George Takei of Star Trek fame would say, oh my, this is going to really change things.
Well, and the thing about it is that, who's going to work Christmas to watch the vulnerabilities? Something as innocuous as taking a weekend off could be catastrophic in there if you don't have proper SIEM tools to monitor what's going on in the environments and alert you if something strange happens.
And of
Um,
course, you were correct that I hadn't even considered. We've talked about it before. When are you going to get attacked? Fridays before a holiday. That's a real common time frame because nobody looks at it for 3 days or whatever. And yeah, we're going to have tools that are working all the time. So Anthropic also rolled out a project that I thought was very wise called Glasswing. Now, what they did here was they got a group of companies together, and here there's about 40 original players in this, including big names that you would respect. Apple and Cisco and CrowdStrike and Palo Alto and banks like JP Morgan and Microsoft was in here and Nvidia was in here. What I noted on the list is pretty much everybody that I respected that was good at security was in the list, but notably absent was Meta and OpenAI, not in the list. And so that was interesting. Whether they were invited or not, I don't know the politics behind it. That's not the deal. But this is
I could imagine that Anthropic wouldn't want two major AI competitors looking at their model and at their cutting edge model.
I get it. So the collaboration here was really kind of a security collaboration. And Anthropic called this an urgent attempt to set up defenses. And they said they would provide up to 100 million in usage credits. That would be tokens, if we want to say it that way, and 4 million in direct donations to open source security organizations to try to get this. Now, one of the current ways of thinking about token usage in the Bay Area and frankly in New York and other places where there's a lot of AI in process, whatever you pay an employee, let's say it's $250,000, they're expected to use at least double their salary in tokens. And that's a bunch of tokens, where Gemini's tokens are about 75 cents ish. To get $500,000 worth of tokens used in the same type of time frame. That's a bunch.
But I will tell you that I have Facebook friends that have they have multiple Claude Max subscriptions, and the reason they do is because they hit their token limit around lunch on one of those Claude Max tools when they're really cranking, and they have to get to a second one, and they say sometimes they have to go out and buy tokens on the market and pay more for them. I talked to you and I talked to a founder most Mondays of a software company. And he actually said that one of the benefits of having the Max subscriptions is that you can get those API keys and then you can run them through whatever engines you're using to generate code or whatever. And he says that, you can get $600 worth of tokens for a $100 a month subscription. So, again, that pricing will adjust, but I'm sharing this with you more than anything because this use of AI is it's changing and it's changing software and technology in ways we didn't see coming.
Yeah. And, to that point, I've started claiming, possibly incorrectly, Brian, that instead of having a subscription at $30, for Copilot or $200 for ChatGPT and so forth, in other words, a per user subscription, that what will actually happen is we will buy tokens and run agents. So we won't need the chat interfaces with as many people because, frankly, that's not a very good use of money or tokens or time if you build the agents correctly. So that's a little different way of thinking about it because in prior labs, we've talked about model context protocols and we've talked about agents. And if you can begin seeing a world where you have agents that go out and do your work, they will consume tokens. But a lot of the usage of AI becomes routine when you do it with agents.
Well, and I will tell you that I'm spending enough now on, because I have a business version of OpenAI. I have Claude. I have the Claude Pro. I have Copilot. I have a ton of different models. And the thing about it is that I think I'm starting to get to the point now where I think I may be better off just picking one engine and getting the tricked out version that gives me tons and tons of tokens and going from there. I mean, I have Perplexity too that I pay 20 a month for. And sometimes I throw some money and tokens on it to try to figure out some issues. So, it's
And I'm really thinking, Brian, to that point that providers like Open Router, which allow us to use a marketplace of tokens and buy tokens at volume and so forth, that probably is a reasonable way to go. But I we've talked about this starting back in 2019 between us that we're getting what was at that time SaaS exhaustion. And in effect, you're getting kind of AI subscription exhaustion because we've got too many different platforms that we're trying to use. You and I need to, I get that. And we do recommend that people run off of two or three different platforms for reasons. In Tech Update this year, we've got at least 10 different accounting tasks that you might do. And there's no one engine that rules them all right now.
and we've not even talked about, the stuff that is vertically targeted at the accounting industry. There could be 10 more of those that we have.
Yeah.
But,
And in a
getting
separate
back.
lab, yeah, sorry, and in a separate lab, we're going to talk to you about, new generation document management. And it's pretty clear right now that Gemini is doing a better job of document extraction as an example, but things change over time. So we want you to keep your wits about you is really the idea. So Brian, I might ask you to bring it home on Mythos because, this has been kind of a doom and gloom session, and you and I are usually much more upbeat.
Well, but what we're really saying here is that, I was reading about military strategy the other day, and and one of the things that I think it was Eisenhower said was that a bad plan today is much better than a perfect plan tomorrow. And it really strikes me that, again, this cybersecurity has really become more of an engineering speed contest. Okay. So your time to remediate and to solve security problems is much less than it used to be. And if you're stuck on slow manual processes and multiple human review cycles where everybody gets 6 weeks a year of vacation and you have a lot of technical debt, you're going to have more and more risk associated with this. Okay.
Yeah, makes great sense. Well, you just brought me on Old Home Week on lots of things today because now I can say I'm from Kansas. I like Ike, but it turns out that I've had the privilege of meeting Eisenhower and had a lot of friends that were friends with Eisenhower. So I've talked to him many times in the past. Well, there it is, another accounting technology lab. We're so glad you listened in, and we'll see you again in the near future. Good day.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. We'll be back next Saturday with a new episode of The Technology Lab from CPA Practice Advisor. Have a great week.